Welcome to this video on critical lenses. This Marxist theory video is part 2 in the Marxism series, hence referring to it as the sequel. Now if you haven't watched part 1, you can find this video on my YouTube channel and on my website. Please go and watch that before you watch this one, it will make a lot more sense. But just to review, here's a quick summary of that video. So the first point was that people are divided into classes such as the upper, middle and working class. The bourgeoisie or the ruling class own the wealth and the proletariat are the working class. However, even among classes, people are still divided, such as urban members of the proletariat versus rural members of the proletariat. And this is thought to weaken them, according to Karl Marx. Number 2, as a result of capitalism and mass production, the worker is alienated from their final product, as they don't often make the whole thing, they just make a part of it. And they're alienated from the buyer as well, as they don't get the choice of who to sell things to, or they don't even meet them. And then finally, they're alienated from the profits because they just get a small amount for their labour. They don't get all of the profits. The next point was that ideology or a strong shared belief system is a powerful tool which can be used by the upper classes to maintain oppressive class structures. And the American dream is an example of this. And then finally, false consciousness is an inability to see such exploitation and oppression, often because of a full belief in the ruling class's ideology. Class consciousness, however, is becoming aware and seeing the oppression and exploitation. So, moving on, let's begin with an extra concept by the man, the myth, the legend himself, Karl Marx. This concept is known as the base and the superstructure. Now, below we have the base. This includes what is known as the relations of production. The subbase basically refers to the economy and how it works. In other words, the bourgeoisie exploiting the proletariat for their labour. It includes private property, capital, finances or commodities. The base also includes the means of production, or all things needed to produce labour and products. This means machines, land, factories, materials, etc. Now, all of this is obviously owned by the bourgeoisie. This is the capitalist and, to Marx, oppressive system which ends up shaping the world. So the base shapes the superstructure. Now, the superstructure, for lack of a better word, is the more personal world around us. It is everything not directly to do with production or wealth. So this includes family, religion, media, culture, schooling, politics, law. These structures maintain and legitimize the base, making us believe that the base is natural and that it's the right way of doing things. The superstructure might be categorized into ideologies which serve the interest of the ruling class, like what's shown in the media, taught in school or preached at church. Alternatively, the superstructure relies on the political and legal structures to maintain the base, such as the law, the police. But these two work in a sort of symbiotic way. The base, as I say, shapes the superstructure, and the superstructure maintains and legitimizes and normalizes the base. Now this brings me to part 2, cultural hegemony. Now the concept is not from Karl Marx, it's from a man called Antonio Gramsci. Now whilst Marx acknowledged the power of ideology and was the man behind the concept false consciousness, Gramsci believed that ideology played a much larger role. This is why I sometimes refer to cultural hegemony as false consciousness 2.0. Gramsci argued that cultural texts maintain the oppressive structures of the ruling class by naturalizing an ideology which legitimizes them. This might be in books, TV shows, newspaper articles, or even memes. The producers of such texts might themselves benefit from a system. For instance, billionaire media moguls, they might be part of that system. The ruling class essentially then shapes culture, which then supports the base and structures which benefit the ruling class. The American dream is a narrative found in cultural texts throughout American history. Many texts present narratives where those who work hard are rewarded for success, or that money and acquiring wealth are the most important things in life. This ideology presented in cultural texts makes its way into the minds of citizens. And it kind of makes sense. Essentially, it is that if one works hard, then one becomes successful. And the harder one works, the more successful they become. Those who are not successful obviously haven't worked hard enough. This is another important element of cultural hegemony. Gramsci calls this common sense ideology. The ideology of the ruling class is seen as the natural way of life. It oppresses the lower classes, but it is justified as being a sort of natural order. In addition, it puts ownership on the individual and does not account for other structures which may assist or hinder certain groups of people in a society. Not everyone has equal access and the same privileges, but cultural hegemony puts all of the ownership on the individual and does not account for differences in gender, race, sex, religion, or class, which might bar some people from having the same ability to achieve. Cultural hegemony is the dominance of a culturally diverse society by the ruling class who manipulate the culture of that society. Now, the idea of the lower middle class heteronormative nuclear family seems so normal to us because it has been normalized through cultural texts. We see this type of family with a mum and a dad, a couple of kids, not impoverished but not wealthy either, all across the media. And we never really question its legitimacy, but it is an example of hegemony at work. It's an idea presented by the ruling classes and made to seem so normal that stepping out of it would be outside of the status quo and other. So how is cultural hegemony achieved? What mechanisms exist in the superstructure to teach such common sense ideologies of the ruling class? Well, Louis Althusser, another Marxist philosopher, had an idea known as ideological state apparatuses, or ISAs. So let's break the phrase down. Ideology obviously refers to a shared belief system. The state can refer to a country or area under which people are ruled. And apparatuses brings to mind images of science lab or gym equipment. And this basically does mean equipment. So what kind of equipment does a state have which it can use to teach an ideology? Well, first of all, let's answer what is an ISA. An ISA is an institution influenced and or owned by the state that transmits the ruling class ideology in order to legitimize or maintain class structures. Althusser said schools were examples of this, as they're often owned by the state or at least influenced by the state, and they transmit the ruling class ideology. He also said that churches and often places of worship were similarly ISAs because they were influenced by the state and they did, in some context, transmit ruling class ideology. So here we have a school. Now, what is the function of an ISA? Well, to ensure that the ruling class dominance of the economic, social and political power continues, that the status quo remains, by convincing the proletariat that the status quo is natural. So an example might be that hard work alone does reward success, and therefore people can continue to work hard without questioning the system. Finally, how does an ISA work? Well, through covertly or in a hidden way, teaching or embedding an ideology which maintains class structures. So in a school context, a school being an ISA, we might reward those who obey authority. As a result of rewarding people who obey authority, we're going to have members of society who do as they're told in the future. In addition, we might teach a distorted version of history or politics, which presents the ruling class's ideology and way of life as being normal. Althusser continued this idea. So ISAs are the non-violent way to get a nation of people in line and oppressed. But just in case they step out of line, it's time to bring in the big guns. This is what Althusser coined repressive state apparatuses, or RSAs. RSAs consist of the army, military, judiciary system, and the prison system. It operates primarily by means of mental and physical coercion and violence, covert and explicit, hidden and very much real. So again, this includes the court of law, the judiciary system, the prison system, locking people up, the police out on the streets enforcing such laws, and the military, the violent arm of the government. These things, others have said, work with ISAs to make sure the status quo continues to be remained. So let's just review a quick summary. The base is the economic structure in which the bourgeoisie exploits the proletariat and it shapes the superstructure on top. The superstructure, or the cultural and societal elements not related to the production, then legitimize the base. Cultural hegemony is the oppression or rule maintained through ideological or cultural means. In other words, among diverse groups, it is a belief that common sense ideology which legitimizes the structures that benefit the ruling class. The ruling class control through shaping culture. And finally, to achieve cultural hegemony and insert such an ideology, the state uses ideological state apparatuses or ISAs, such as schools or churches or the state-owned media. Now, the goal of ISAs is to construct values which keep people oppressed. If this doesn't work, repressive state apparatuses, RSAs, such as the army or police, use force and violence to repress the people. So I've just got a couple of extra questions you can use when reading any cultural text within your Marxist analysis. So in what ways does the text depict class structures as being maintained? Do you see examples of hegemony or ISAs or RSAs? What does the base and superstructure look like? Does the text challenge the ruling class ideology, the one that we might see in the world, or does it reproduce it? Are there any examples of RSAs or ISAs at play within the text plot or within its setting? And then finally, how does the text present the relationships between the proletariat and the bourgeoisie? And what is the text trying to say about these relationships? Good luck with your Marxist lens as you apply it to literature in the future.